Point 2, Basics of JavaScript Functions. We have learned JavaScript functions. It looks pretty easy to use JavaScript functions. Why we need to study, another round? Actually, we have some basic background knowledge about JavaScript functions. If we have that part, then later when you see there are several different ways to use JavaScript functions, then you can understand easily. Otherwise, when you see there is some different way to use JavaScript function, you may feel very hard to understand. All right, so in our part C, we will spend some time to try to get a better understanding on JavaScript functions. All right, so let's start first with properties of JavaScript functions. Here, there are several new things from JavaScript functions. First, JavaScript functions are values that can be called. So think about this, values. We didn't treat JavaScript functions as values before, right? Functions, they're so different. How can you treat them as usual values, right? 1, 2, 3, string value, those things quite different from JavaScript functions. Here you can see there is another special view of JavaScript function. We can treat it as values. What's the benefit of this new view? Because when we treat a function as a value, we can assign this value to a variable, right? Yeah, we can assign it. We can use it as a value. We know there are different situations we can use values. In those situations, you can use functions, JavaScript functions. So that's why this is a new view and a very useful view. Yeah. So let's try to understand this one better. Since it is a value, we may ask a question like this. Can we pass a function to another function as a value? Yeah, because if it's not a function, if we just pass a value of a variable, then no problem, right? Value of a parameter variable, we can pass it to one function, no problem. So now the question, because we can treat a function as a value, we just pass this value to another function. So you can see this view allows us to use a JavaScript function in a new way, some way we haven't used it before. Yeah. So that's why that's something new for us. Yeah. So you can call a function by mentioning its name followed by arguments in parentheses. Yeah, we're familiar with this way. Yeah. So this is typically how we call a JavaScript function. Yeah. So this is not new for us. Yeah. This property, if you don't return anything from a function. So when you write a definition of a function, okay, yeah. So let's say my fun, something like this, right? Yeah, that's the definition of your function. At the end, you do not give a return statement. Okay, so no return statement at the end. Okay, what would happen? Yeah. So this property tells us if you do not return anything from a function, undefined is returned by default, implicitly. You do not need to do anything, but that function will return this string, undefined, undefined. So you may have the experience. So when you work on JavaScript functions, sooner or later you will have many situations you will get this undefined values. So we call JavaScript functions because no value returned. So in that situation, you have this undefined value. So now you know the reason. So that's another property. All functions are objects. So you treat function as object. So no contradiction with values, right? Because we can treat objects as values, right? Object values. Okay? So no contradiction. Here, when we treat functions as objects, then we can use some special way, operator, instance of, because this instance of, there is an operator to check the instance type of an object. So we can use the instance of operator to check it. Here, let me give you a simple example of that. So you have a JavaScript function. So you define a JavaScript function. Now, console.log. So that's the, common way we use for testing purpose. So we want to test the output of this function. Console.log ID. Look at this. ID is the name of this function. And we treat it as an object. So this object of what type? This function type, capital function type. So that's the concrete object type. So there is an object. Object type function. Now we check this ID variable, right? We treat it as a variable here. So that variable is an instance of that function. Okay? So this way, we can, sometimes we want to really detect if a given variable is a function or not. So this is one way to detect it. Later in our example, so I will give you a few more examples later, you will see we have another way to check the function type. So that is this type of operator. Okay? So we want to know the type of some variable. Okay? What type? So it can also give us function information if it is a function, if this variable is a function. So these two ways we can check function type. All right. Next, regarding the function, we use parameters, arguments. What's the difference between parameters and arguments? Here, just give you the simple difference. Because usually, many times, people use these two concepts interchangeably. People do not try to separate them. But actually, they have some difference. First, parameters are used to define a function. Usually, when we define a function, here, this function, and when we need to pass our data, input data, right? So input data as variables here. So we treat as variables. Okay? Yeah. As placeholders for the input data. So in that situation, we should use parameters. All right. Now let's look at the argument situation. Arguments are used to invoke a function. When we invoke a function, we pass data to a function. We pass values. Okay? We pass values to a function. So in this situation, we call it arguments. Okay? So here you try to separate these two concepts. One, variables, another, values. So variables versus values. Okay? Yeah. And in definition and in invocation, when we call it invocation. Yeah. So that's the main difference between parameters and arguments. Okay. All right. Next, defining functions. So we want to learn several ways to define a function. We already know there is one way. Yeah. Declaration, right? Function definition. We're familiar with that way, but there are some other ways. The first way, function expressions way. This way we rarely used. Most of the time, people do not use this way. But occasionally, this way is used. But when this way is used, if you do not learn this special expression, function expression way, it may not be easy to understand. So that's why we need to learn it. A function expression produces a value, a function object. So a function object adds a value for some variable. Yeah, because when you have a value, you can assign it to another variable. But this time, that variable stores a function object. That's the meaning. Okay? So you can see, we need to have this background knowledge. Otherwise, if you see other people using this kind of variable way to pass your function, then you may feel hard to understand. Yeah. All right, example. Yeah. These two lines. The first line, we use a function expression here. See? So this is a function expression. So you can see we use the function keyword. Okay? And we can pass parameters to this function. Yeah. So you can put a definition within the curly braces. Yeah. After that, the new part is you assign it to a variable. You assign it to a variable. That's new. We haven't used any function in this way. Yeah. So this is new for us. Yeah. After that, now you have a variable, right? Variable has a name, add variable. So you can call this function by this add variable name. When you call it, you still use the usual function call way. So you pass two arguments to this function, just the usual way. Okay? Yeah. So that is pretty straightforward. But the only thing you need to understand is assign it to a variable. This function is treated as an object, function object, and assigned to a variable. So that variable is of function type. You can use instance of operator to check it, or use type of operator to check it. Yeah. All right. Because normal function expressions, function expressions don't have a name. Yes. After function, you see there is no name here. Okay? No name after the function keyword. So that's why we call it anonymous function expressions. Anonymous, no name. Okay? Yeah. All right, so that is one type, anonymous type. But we also have named function expressions. Still function expressions, but we just use some name for this function. Okay? So let's look at this named function expression. Only accessible inside the function expression. Although you provide a name to your function, but that's different from our usual function name. When we declare a function, provide a function definition, that's not like that. Because here, the name you provide to a function expression can only be accessible inside the function expression, not outside function expression. That's the rule. That's the difference. Yeah. So let me use a simple example to explain this rule. Example. Yeah. All right, first, we have a named function, this part, above this line. We have the named, because there is a name, right? Me, M-E. There is a name for this function expression, named. All right, but after we define this function, we also assign to a variable called a repeat. All right, but this me can only be accessed inside the function expression, inside the curly braces. You can call it recursively. So recursive function call. In that way, you can use it. Okay? Yeah, but in that case, it's important. If you use anonymous function expression, you cannot call it recursively, right? Yeah, but now you can call it recursively. Yeah, but no more than that. Yeah, outside curly braces, you cannot call it. Outside the curly braces, if you want to call variable name. Call variable name, not this me. Okay. All right. So let's look at how to call it below. All right. First, we call it console.log repeat 3. Yeah, the first argument, a string, second argument. Yeah, repeat, because we use the variable name to call it. That's legal. Okay, and that's outside of function definition. Okay, outside the function expression. Yeah, here, we call expression. Okay, not definition. Yeah, we try to separate from the usual definition way. Yeah. All right, next. Now, here, if we use the me, the function name, the function expression, that name, no. You get error. Okay? You get error. Not defined. Me is not defined. Okay? Yeah. Doesn't work. Yeah. So you need to know that. Yeah. So these are the new properties we haven't learned before this lecture. Yeah. So that's why we need to learn it. Yeah. All right. So that is the function expression. Second type, function declarations. We learned this before. We are familiar with this way. Yeah. So we do not need to really, because nothing new here. Okay? Here I just, go through it quickly. A function declaration declares a new variable. here. We use our new understanding. We treat it as a variable. Right? Before this point, today's lecture, we didn't understand functions as variables. From now on, we can understand functions as variables. Okay? Creates a function object. Function as an object. The new view, and assign it to the variable. Okay, so this variable, assign it to the variable. That's the new view. The old way, function declaration way, now we use this new view to understand it. So that's useful. This new view is useful. So let me show you one simple example here. That is a simple example. Now use our new view, we understand this. So this is what we call function declaration. So not a function expression. So this is a function declaration. Okay. All right. So we have a function name, a regular function name add, but this add we treat it as a variable. Okay. So that's new. This time we treat it as a variable. Okay. All right. Then the definition part, the whole thing. So the whole thing, the definition, we treat as an object. Okay. After we define that function object, that object is assigned to this variable. Okay. Assigned to this variable add. And then later, when we need to call this function, we use this variable, that is the function name, and we call this function. That is the new view. Okay? So you can see quite different from what we learned before. Very different. All right. Then next slide, before we end this video, C.2, I want to give you two more examples. Very simple, but with this new view, we can understand better. The first example, function expression here. The variable greeting, right? So then anonymous. Look at here, anonymous function expression. Okay, all right. After that, we use the type of operator. We want to check this variable, greeting is a variable. We want to check if this variable is of function type or not. Okay, so we use this document.write. We try to see the output of this operation. So what do you see the output? Function, a lowercase function. Here you can see the way we use this type of different from that instance of operator, right? The object instance of that operator, different. So you have two ways to check the function type. So this is another way, right? After that, now you want to, because after you check it, get it true. So this is it is a function. So you can call it, okay? So greeting, you call it. Now, the variable name, then you treat it as a function, right? You call it, treat it as a function. So you append a pair of parentheses. So you get a result. So that's the first example. The second example. All right. This example. Now we want to use a function as a variable in a different way. First, we define a function. So this is a declaration way. So declaration way, and it is not a expression way, function expression way. This is a function declaration way. Okay, declaration way. Okay. All right. So in the declaration way, now we use our new understanding. The name of the function. Create greeting. We treat it as a variable, right? Because after the function is defined, it is treated as an object assigned to this variable. So we treat it as a variable. Right? So we can use it as a variable. Our new view. Okay. All right. Yeah. Next, we define another function. This function called a display greeting function. Display greeting function, a new function. This function has two parameters. The first one, it is a parameter variable. We call it the greeting function. We expect the first parameter to be a function, greeting function. So, just a name, just a variable name. Second, username. Okay, yeah, two parameters. Then inside the function body definition, return. This time, yeah, because we expect it as a function, but we treat it as a variable. Yeah, we can do that based on our understanding of this part. We can do that. We treat it as a variable. All right, but this variable is a special function variable. So you can use this variable to call that function. All right, so here, greeting functions, the variable name of your function, then you pass argument. Okay, so that parameter, you pass it to this function as its argument. Yeah, so you get the result. All right, with that definition of the two functions, then we call these two functions in this way. All right. Variable result. This time we call a function. So here we do not, so here, this is a function call, okay? So this is a function call. This is not a function expression. This is a function call. Function invocation, right? Yeah. So the function name, arguments, two arguments. The first argument is the function name of the first function, create greeting. Because that function can be treated as a variable, so we can pass it as the first argument. That's legal, right? So then the second one, a string. Yeah. So then, because this function will return the result, we assign it to this variable. Okay? So the return result, you call it as a function. Create greeting, pass Peter to this function, so you get return value like that. Okay? Yeah. So then you output. So you get the output. Yeah. So here you can see only after you learn the basic background of this type, then you can understand this example, especially mainly this example. Yeah. Because other people, you should have some chances that other people will use this way to write the programs. When you see that, you should be able to understand. Otherwise, it will be very hard. Okay? After you can understand that, so you will see it will be very powerful. You can call functions in this way. It will be very powerful. So think about that. Yeah. It will be very powerful. Yeah. All right. So that's it. Yeah. Yeah, so we will finish part C.2 here.